water activity. So what is water activity? Water activity is the amount of water that be needed for bacteria to grow on these conditions, for example. Okay, so water activity is written in a manner like that. So if we lead the water activity, is the atmosphere, is a water content of the food. So have water content of a food which we talk about the water activity divided by the water content of our atmosphere. So this is what we call the water activity. Let me erase this. Okay, so water content of atmosphere. So atmospheric water content, and this is water content, the food divided by the atmospheric water content will be the water activity of that food. So normally bacteria will need the water activity of almost 1 to 0.98 and like that, and some molds have the slightly lower water activity like 0.76 to 0.60 like that. So some molds have a lower water activity, they can grow in lower water activity, but most of the bacteria needs water activity of 1 or 0.98 like this kind of water activity to grow. And when you talk about the osmophilic microorganisms, those microorganisms prefer high osmotic pressure to grow on, but these are rare in case. And what do you mean by xerophilic microorganisms? They prefer low water activity to grow. We are also having some microorganisms they love to grow in lower water activity. We call them the xerophilic microorganisms. Now let's talk about the physical structure and what this physical structure gives us. We have a physical structure accounts for the surface area of the molecule. As we know, if we increase the surface area, if we increase the surface area, for example, we have this. We have a surface area, and we have this. We have a larger surface area. We have the same thing. Another thing has in further larger surface area. We have this which is a smaller bit. But if we divide this cell, if we divide this in small parts, then what will end up with? It will end up with a large and large surface area. More surface area than this does. So this is having a large surface area, for example. So in this case, S3 is far greater than S1 according to surface areas. So why surface areas are important? Because if we provide higher surface area, large surface areas, then many microbes come and sit and they can have fun in the food. So if we are not providing that much of surface area, then it will be difficult for bacteria to grow on. So if we grind and mix them together, it will increase the surface area, because in normal cases when you talk about fermentation, you can see that we have grinding, we mix all these things, we can scatter these things in a really large surface areas, because we give a large surface area for microbes to grow on. It's like a mattress for microbes to grow on. It's a food mattress. So if we do not promote the large surface area, then it will be difficult for doing this. Our outer skin of vegetable and fruits slows microbial growth, because they actually block the microbes to enter. So our skin, or the food screen, is a large surface area. If it is open up like normal, if it has open tissues, then it will be highly vulnerability by attacking those microorganisms. But skin cells, which are really strong cells, which are the first layer of defense for us and for those food and vegetables, they protect those bacteria to grow and enter into the active tissue of vegetables and fruits. And we have the antimicrobial substances, for example. Normally in some of the fruits and foods we can find these antimicrobial substances for preventing their tissues to be hampered or to be damaged. Normally coumarins can be found in case of fruits and vegetables. Most of the fruits and vegetables contains this antimicrobial, natural antimicrobial, which is called coumarins. And we have lysozymes. We know this, we have seen this, we have listened this name many times. This lysozyme can be found in cow's milk and eggs too, but it is vigorously found in cow's milk. They can prevent but its natural spoilage, but milk is still perishable food, though it has a lysozyme. So if we do not have lysozyme, it can be really spoiled really quickly, because milk contains lots of bacteria actually. Aldehyde and phenolic compounds, for example, we can find in herbs and species, different spices. We can find this aldehyde and phenolic compounds. Why phenolic compound? Because it creates aroma. When you eat these spices and those herbs, they have a sweet aroma that come into our mind, and that they're really good appetizer there for that. and they contains because they contain these phenolic compounds, and those phenolic compounds, as we know, phenol is itself an anti-infectious agent, so that's why phenolic compounds help them to be prevented by the bacterial damage. That's why spices are normally generally not hampered by bacterial contents. These phenolic compounds help them to be not damaged. And we also have allicin, which acts as an antibacterial agent, which can be found in garlic. That's why used to different times we used to coat meat with garlic paste to prevent the bacterial spoilage of that meat. Okay, because it has the normal and natural protector, which is allicin. And we have different polyphenol agents which can be found in green and black teas. That's why those teas are not normally hampered by bacteria. You can store those teas again, and whenever you have found this phenol or polyphenolic compound, you find a fine aroma. In the green tea and black tea you also can find this fine aroma. In coffee you can find this aroma. So this aroma inducing particles like phenols and polyphenolic contents help those things to be protected by the attack of those different bacteria cells. Okay, and now if we talk about the food spoilage in a whole, how and why the food is spoilage, it's due to the growth and attack of bacteria and microbes in the food. So microbes are attacking food for their own eating purposes. They eat them and they stay on them, they are rapidly growing on them and doing their jobs like that. So it induces preferable cessation of microbes. So it needs a particular amount of load of microorganisms. It's not that a food is there and 500 microorganisms come in and they can set place and they can take a toll on this food and they can make a visible appearance of damage outside. No, it needs a million of different microorganisms to work together to finally make the visible appearance of that food damage. Okay. And it needs the perfect temperature, perfect pH, or it means that it needs a perfect environmental conditions to support their growth. So there are different factors that controls the division and growth of microorganisms in the food. There are different regulators there. So this is a regulator of this load of microorganisms and also the environmental conditions. So different foods undergo different types of spoilage process. If we look at them, there are different spoilage. For example, in protein content food, they go through the proteolysis. Example, the carbohydrates go to the fermentation processes, and lipids go through different processes to get hampered. And not only they get hampered by the direct attack of microorganisms and by release of enzymes by the microorganisms, but also microorganisms found some or release some protein parts which are called toxins. For example, algal toxins can do that work. For example, you may contaminate the shellfish and finfish. Shellfish is a really highly perishable food, as we know, because algal toxin can damage them really well. Okay, let's move on to our next slide. Yeah, okay. Now let's talk about those agents which will cause diseases, not directly by bacteria, but some of the agents which are secreted by bacteria. Those are called toxins. Toxins normally are the proteinaceous particles, and these particles, when enters into our body, that can hamper our different systems. For example, muscular system, it can hamper our gastrointestinal system, and it can also hamper many times in our nervous system, like botulinum toxin. Okay. So we have different types of toxins. So I have enlisted 3 different types of toxin particles which are secreted by microorganisms normally in food, and when you eat those food, those toxins come into our body and that can affect us. For example, we have ergotoxin. What this ergotoxin does, so ergotism, sorry, this is not ergotoxin, ergotism, toxic condition caused by growth of sorry, it's a huge mistake. So ergotism is a toxic condition that caused by growth of a fungus in grains. It's called the ergotism. Okay, we call them the ergotoxin. Actually, those toxic materials which is found here is called the ergotoxin for that purpose. And if aflatoxin, what is the aflatoxin does? It's a carcinogen which produced in fungus infected grains. So if we talk about grains, because almost we are dependent on these grain materials, we need grain materials to produce different parts. So if the grain materials are affected by some fungus, this fungus can produce some of the carcinogen. Carcinogen means those materials which can induce cancer in our tissues. So this carcinogenic toxin are produced via some of the fungus. We call them the aflatoxins that can enter our body and that can make us sick. And it also can produce the fumonisins. What are these fumonisins does? It are also the carcinogens which are produced by fungus infected corns. So we have talked about the fungus infections in all these cases, and normally toxins are produced by funguses in food infections. That's why when you think about the fungus infected food, so it's not bacteria, it's fungus. We can see them, it's no problem, so cut it out and eat the rest of the food. So don't eat them, don't try to do that, because most of the fungus normally produces toxins. They do not affect directly by attacking them via enzymes, but they produces toxin which are most of the time carcinogens and really bad for our health, and it can induce cancer genes to be activated. They can activate proto-oncogenes to be oncogene and finally induce cancer. So they are really dangerous to work with. And we also have different toxins like endotoxins and exotoxins. Endotoxin is a part of endotoxins is a normal part of gram-negative bacteria. So if you have gram-negative bacteria, they have an extracellular layer, and this extracellular membrane layer contains this endotoxin. We have the three different part of that layer. We have the normal lipopolysaccharide layer. In this lipopolysaccharide or LPS, we call the layer LPS. It's a lipid and a polysaccharide combination to make a lipopolysaccharide layer. In this lipopolysaccharide layer, we find a particular chain of material which can act as an endotoxin. So what an endotoxin can do? Endotoxin can trigger different damages in your cell. You can pour your cell membrane and enters into a cell, and you can damage your cell in different ways. There are several gram-negative bacteria out there which can produce these endotoxins, and when those bacteria attack food, they can release these endotoxins. But the one thing you have to remember in your mind is endotoxins cannot be released, because these are a part of a cell membrane. So if a bacterial cell membrane, endotoxins are part of the cell membrane. So the only way this endotoxin can hamper you by entering the whole bacteria into a cell. So when the whole bacteria enters your cell and the cell die, after the death of the cell, only the endotoxin can be released from the cell membrane, and finally it can damage you. So whenever the cell remains alive, endotoxins cannot damage us. But we have another set of toxins which can damage us in all the time, which we call the exotoxin. So when you're talking about exotoxins, most of the toxins are produced are the exotoxin. These toxins are protein particles. Endotoxins are not all protein particles, they are lipopolysaccharides, but the exotoxins are the protein particles which are secreted by bacterial cells. So when the exotoxins released, for example, I can say the exotoxins, botulinum toxin is an exotoxin, cholera toxin is an exotoxin, diphtheria toxin is an exotoxin. So these are the toxins which you can find different diseases like cholera, which is a massive foodborne illness, and you can have the botulinum. If we eat those things, you can have it. And also we have the exotoxin secreted by bacteria Staphylococcus aureus, which also produces the exotoxin, which is hard, is very dangerous poison, and is getting stronger and stronger day by day. So these exotoxins, when it enters into our body, it can damage our different lining of our tissue. For example, it can damage our gastrointestinal tract, it can damage our nervous system, so it can damage different regions of our body, and we can do nothing. So this exotoxin can be secreted, and the exotoxin to be secreted, the cell or the secretion cell is not have to die. They can secrete the cells on its living time. So now let's talk about food preservation. How can we preserve our very favorable food? So to actually understand food preservation, we have to know what are the conditions for the microorganisms to grow. We have talked about them, the environmental conditions, the intrinsic and extrinsic factor, and all these things. Now another thing we must know when you talk about the food preservation techniques, and that is the division and growth of a bacteria. What is the normal way of growth of a bacteria? We have suppose one bacteria. This one bacteria will grow into two bacteria, and these two bacteria, each of those bacteria can grow into another two bacteria. What we've got four bacteria. Now those bacteria will go on to produce more offspring. So we've got 8 bacteria after third round of division, for example. Okay, so that's how bacteria can go. So if you can look at the division of bacteria, it is going on exponentially. So we have an exponential growth of bacteria, right? We have an exponential growth. You have an exponential growth of bacteria. So all the time it's going on. If you draw a curve of bacterial growth, what you find is a characteristic curve is like that. If a simple load of bacteria, that's why it's not starting from the set point 0, it is coming from this place and it gets stabilized and then gets fall. So this is a normal curve of bacterial growth. If we're talking about the bacterial load in this axis, and you get time in this axis, so this is time, for example, time, which is a independent variable, and the dependent variable here is a bacterial number or bacterial content. If we talk about the bacterial content in this y-axis and the time in x-axis, what we can find this curve like this. It is called the bacterial growth curve. In this growth curve, we found several different stages of bacterial growth. The first stage of bacterial growth, what we can find here, is this, which is an exponential growth. When the bacteria is dividing like this, which is an exponential growth, 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, like this, and so on. And after some time, it will have a halt place. In this halt region, it will be changing from this rapid growth towards stabilized growth. We call this phase stationary phase. In the first phase, when they go in exponentially, we call it the exponential phase or log phase. And this, after the log phase, we have the stationary phase. Why we have the stationary phase? Because after some time, well, the food material is getting exhausted, the food material is getting lower and lower, and finally they have a survival chance of falling. And some of them are surviving, and no other division is possibly occurred. And not only that, but also the toxic material, the junk part of the bacterial cell is also increasing, because bacteria eat foods, and after eating food, they need to release something in the outer space, because they do not need all those digested junk material in their cell like us. So they need to release them. So when they want to release those particles, they are releasing that. So their environment is surrounded by the junk materials or the toxic materials that they secreted after the digestion of the food, but they are also lowering down the food content. And after some time, that's why they reach the stationary phase. And after going through the stationary phase for a long time, they have a rapid decline in their growth phase. Why? Because in those situations, they run out of food and they run out of water content and all these things, and finally all those bacterial population are came to exist or came to be seized. After some time, they will fall. So this is a characteristic curve of bacteria. So if we want to prevent the bacterial growth in different places, we can do that. So we need a particular starting culture. So from this actual graph, where we have several things to conclude, we need a particular load of bacteria to be triggered in different environmental situations to grow in food. So we need a normal load of bacteria in food. This is general load or starter load of bacteria. If we do not have a starter load of bacteria in food, so the food, if it is sterile, if we store the sterile food in anaerobic conditions, there will be no chance of food contamination. But normally what happens in these all foods, we can have lots of amount of initial load of bacteria, and this initial load of bacteria helps this bacterial load to take on the whole food. And if we want to prevent the food growth in this exponential phase, it is really difficult, because they are growing really rapidly. We need to eliminate. If we eliminate the food content really rapidly, if we eliminate the water content really rapidly, then we can make this stationary phase come earlier of that time. So after doing that, we can make this after, for example, we have treated this food with different enzymes or different particles that makes this food really dangerous. For example, then we can do is this the bacterial load will be fall, and we can make this stationary phase come earlier during this bacterial life cycle, and they usually enters into the stationary phase many times before. So this is the time before they can enter it. So we can prevent them by doing this. So knowing the bacterial growth property, knowing the bacterial curve, we can use a different property of bacteria, different environmental manipulation to work on bacterial cell and to stop their growth in the food. Okay. So commonly what is happen, we can remove. So normally what are the basic techniques for food preservation? There are many techniques. There are maximum actually 3 techniques. What is this? We make the food we make the food in such a place that they never caught microorganisms. That's the first thing. Second thing, we can remove microorganisms. We can remove the initial load of microorganisms which is placed there. The third thing, we can kill the microorganisms that present in that food in those situations. So these are the normal things. The first thing, which is the removal of microorganisms, that usually be established by the filtration method. There are ultra filters out there, which is for 0.45 micrometer, for example. So you have filters like this micrometer. These filters are really small pore size, like this. The diameter of the pore is 0.45 micrometer. So through this diameter, bacteria cannot pass through. So bacteria can be filtered using these ultra filters. We commonly use this filter for in case of water, beer, wine, different juices and different soft drinks. So all of these other liquids we can use this filter, because in case of solid materials we cannot use the filter technique. We need to have some other technique. So normally food preservation can be done by manipulating different temperatures. So now what we are doing, we are actually killing those microorganisms which are there, and what we are doing, we are actually lowering the load of microorganisms which is there in our food via the manipulation of the environment. Here we have lower temperature. If we refrigerated our food in 5 degrees Celsius, it is not stop microbial growth, but what it does, but microorganisms can still cause spoilage with extended spoilage, but they cannot do the extended spoilage. Growth at temperatures below -10 degrees Celsius has been observed. So that means the food in the refrigerator is not at all safe. So in the 5 degrees Celsius in the food, all those enzymatic activity of the food is halted for some time. It's not that all the enzymes are killed or the bacterial cells particles are killed. Nothing is killed there. So everything is there. Only they are going into a hibernation. When we make out that food into the normal environment, then the food can be spoiled by the bacteria which present there. So that's why it is said that we have to eat a food immediately under 4 hours after taking out from it refrigerator. So if you take out a food from a refrigerator, you have to eat it under 4 hours. If you delay that, if you doing this in case of meat, then do it under 2 hours, because in those hours what we are actually giving the rapid environment to grow of those growth of those microorganisms, because for a long time those microorganisms are starved. They are placed in 5 degrees Celsius temperature. So when you take them out, they have found their normal optimum temperature, and when the temperature actually is converted into this normal room temperature like that, then those bacterial enzymes are again activated, and they can help the bacteria to grow and take food particles and make cellular respiration to grow on, and the cell will divide rapidly in those situations, and finally we have a huge load of bacteria. So that's why if we have to eat the food after refrigerator, or taking out it after refrigerator, we have to do it under at least 4 hours. We can use high vacuum canning to prevent the spoilage, because via the canning process we are heating that food about 115 degrees Celsius to 125 degrees Celsius. That's really dangerous. That's really dangerous for us to kill spoilage microbes, but not necessarily all microbes can be killed via this canning process. But if we use this canning process, we have high temperature treatment. Also we have the what you call the anaerobical treatment. In this anaerobical treatment, also some of the anaerobic microbes can grow, but most of the aerobic microorganisms cannot grow in these situations. Okay. Now let's talk about so spoilage. This canned food can also be spoiled, but there are several different techniques. During the canning process may be different faults, that's why they can be spoiled. For the handling purposes that can be spoiled, and the under processing can cause spoilage, but most of the time this canned food cannot be spoiled, because they can be stored for a long time for as it is. And we can pasteurize food for eliminating different microorganisms. What is a pasteurization? Pasteurization is a process of rapid heating and cooling to keep and shake the load of microorganisms, initial load of microorganisms in a food, but it cannot remove or eliminate all the microorganisms. So it is not a sterilization process. This is a process of eliminating some of the bacteria. So in this case, we kill the pathogens and sustainably reduces number of oxygen. So there are a number of different ways of pasteurization nowadays. The normal pasteurization is the to heat the 63 degree Celsius temperatures for 15 minutes. It's a normal for 15 minutes. It's a normal way of pasteurization purpose. 63 degrees Celsius temperature for 15 minutes. If we do this, we can eliminate most of the microorganisms that can be grown in the food and that can spoil us. So this pasteurization can also be done in case of liquid foods like milk and wine and beer and all these things. But in case of solid food, the pasteurization technique cannot be applied. what we can apply different variations of this pasteurization that can be that can be a high temperature short time pasteurization, and we have a low temperature long time pasteurization, HTST and LTLT. So what is high temperature short time? The name suggests all the temperature is higher. So in this case the temperature reaches to 120 degrees Celsius. When it reaches to 120 degrees Celsius almost, it kills most of the microorganisms or load of microorganisms that situation, and as a result of it will damage all. And but the time for using this 120 degree 130 degrees Celsius temperature really small. For example 150 degrees Celsius 115 degrees Celsius temperature for 1 seconds or for 2 seconds, that will be the temperature in case of HTST. But in case of LTLT, long temperature long time, low temperature long time, we use normal low temperature for 90 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius and all this. We use it for 15 to 20 minutes to do that. And we have ultra high temperature pasteurization. In this ultra temperature pasteurization, we used to use 150 and 160 degrees Celsius temperature to kill most of the microorganisms that can be found in food. So this is for 1 second only in this ultra high temperature pasteurization processes. But this pasteurization are also being done, but in this case. But why the shorter heating times are used? Because the shorter heating times result in the improved flavor. If you use a longer heating time, that results in damaging of flavoring. If we heat it very long times, it will damage the compound that acquires for different flavor. Those protein compounds will be damaged, and as a result of it, the flavor of that food will be abolished. That's why we have to use, and nowadays we are using the short temperature pasteurization techniques to do this thing.